Well, let's continue our coverage of the Henry Tax Review now, which includes a controversial $9 billion super profits tax on our mining companies, a lift in the superannuation guarantee, and a cut to company taxes. Earlier in the program, we were speaking with Heather Ridout, the Chief Executive of the Australian Industry Group and a member of the Henry Tax Review Group. She's now calling on the mining sector to dig deep and broker the best deal they can with the federal government.
The industry has every right now to get in and advocate hard on the rate, the design of that system and the transitional arrangements for existing projects and try and get the fairest deal they can for the industry. And that's what they'll be doing, and that's what they have every right to be doing.
Well, Treasurer Wayne Swan calls this the most significant reform of a lifetime. Few, though, agree with him, it would seem. The opposition is deeply unimpressed. Shadow Treasurer Joe Hockey says the government has squibbed any real reform. It's a gutless response from a gutless government, is what the opposition says, and the Shadow Treasurer will join us in a moment. But first, Treasurer Wayne Swan is in our Parliament House studio. Treasurer, welcome to breakfast.
Good morning, Fran. It's great to be with you.
Now, Treasurer, not big enough and not bold enough. That seems to be a summary of a lot of the reaction this morning.
Well, it's certainly a summary that I dispute. In terms of the broad economic impact, this is a very significant package, probably more significant than anything in living memory. Just think about what we're doing here. A fundamental reform of resource taxation, an historic reform of superannuation, and also an historic reform of company taxation with very significant benefits in the long term, particularly for small business. But what does all this add up to? What this adds up to is a package of measures to strengthen our economy, to broaden our economy, to simplify our tax system, and to strengthen the economy, particularly given the challenges that are coming our way as a consequence of the resources boom and economic change in our region. So in total, a very broad economic impact put in place to deal with the future challenges that are coming down the road from growth in the region.
Is it fair to characterise a 2% cut in the company tax rate from 30% to 28% as a historic reform?
Well, it's a 6% cut in the company tax rate. Now, we can't do these things.
It's a 6%, isn't it a 2% cut?
It's a 6% cut in the company tax rate, Fran. Now, we can't do these things tomorrow because we've constructed a package which is revenue neutral. We've made it very clear that at the core of everything we are doing is our fiscal responsibility and our fiscal rules. So what we've put in place is an affordable package of measures which will put in place the historic reforms in superannuation, the cuts to company taxation, but particularly the extra benefits in here for small business, and also putting in place the historic reforms in resource taxation. Effectively doing something about what is a very, very inefficient form of taxation in the form of royalties, updating that system with a resource profits-based tax, which will encourage growth in the industry, but importantly, return a fair share of the profits to the Australian people.
And I want to get to that in a moment. Can I just clarify, though, Treasurer, the company tax rate is currently at 30%. You're recommending it goes to 28%, is that right?
That's right.
How does that constitute a 6% cut? Isn't that a 2% cut?
Well, it's the rate cut is, the rate is 30%, it moves down to 28%. That's a 6% cut.
And that's a 2% cut?
It's a 6%.
30% to 28.
The 6% cut is the tax paid as a result of the 2% cut.
Oh, I see. I beg your pardon, in the take.
Yeah.
Let's get to the...
It's a 2% cut in the headline rate. I understand that, Fran, but it's a 6% cut.
Okay. Let's go to the 40% tax on the mining profits, raising $9 billion a year, a huge impost on the sector. It might deliver a better deal to the average taxpayer, but can you guarantee it won't cost jobs in the mining sector?
Well, Fran, our aspiration and intent is for the mining industry to grow and to put in place the most efficient taxation method that we can to support that industry. For example, at the moment, the royalties regime punishes those mines which are starting up. It punishes those mines, for example, that may not necessarily be making a profit in any particular year. Royalties are very inefficient, which is why Dr. Henry and the independent committee recommended that they be abolished and be replaced with a resource profits-based tax. We already have a 40% PRRT, a 40% profits-based tax applying on the biggest investment that has been made in this country in living memory, namely the Gorgon project. So there is nothing new about resource-based profits taxation or the 40% rate, which is applying in projects like Gorgon. The royalties regime has not been giving the Australian people their fair share. Before the boom, in terms of resource profits, about 1 in 3 of those dollars were paid in terms of royalties. That has dropped to less than 1 in 7. So the Australian people have not been receiving their fair share. Our objective is to update that method of taxation so we get our fair share, the companies get a fair go, the industry grows over time.
But can you argue with Santos, for instance, when they make the point that you can't take $9 billion out of a sector every year and not expect a negative impact? I mean, it might be fair, but it's going to have an impact on the economy and jobs and growth, isn't it?
Well, there will be some companies that have been extremely profitable and have done very well as a result of the fact that the royalties regime has not been updated and not been giving a fair share to the Australian people, who will complain and resist these changes. But we will sit down with the industry and work out transitional arrangements, but some companies will pay a bit more. Of that there is no doubt, because they have been given very generous treatment over recent years because of the failures of the royalty regime. But overall, this will grow the mining industry because it is a predictable tax and it is an efficient tax.
And if that's so, then you would expect the mining industry to be happy with it at the moment. What about negotiation with miners? We heard Heather Ridout, a member of the Henry Tax Review panel, basically urging mining companies to get the best deal they can. Is the 40% tax negotiable?
Well, we've outlined the design of the tax. We've said within the design of the tax, we're happy to sit down and to talk about all of the transitional arrangements. And those discussions will begin as we go through the weeks ahead. It is certainly...
What about that 40% rate? Is that negotiable?
Well, we've outlined our proposal for a 40% rate. I've already made the point to you that that 40% rate is the rate that currently applies in a number of projects in Australia where we have a profits-based tax. So what we will do is talk to the companies about the transitional arrangements, particularly for existing projects, and work our way through all of those issues through the various mineral categories and the various companies. And that's what we do with any particular tax reform at any time. But we do understand that we have to engage the industry here, and we are.
I'm trying to follow you and read between the lines there. And as you have those consultations over transitional arrangements for projects that are already underway, does that mean the 40% tax on those projects at least could be negotiable?
Well, what we've said to the industry, and it's outlined very clearly in all the documentation we produced yesterday, that we will look at the transitional arrangements for existing projects. But overall, this is a method of taxation which supports growth in the industry, which is fair, and which is applied in many other parts of this country, or in other parts of this country and elsewhere in the world.